everyone! First and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for 100 subscribers. I know it's not really a big milestone for much larger channels, but it's a really big deal for me, and I just want to let each and every one of you know that I am so grateful for your support. Today we are going to be continuing Create This Book. It has been a very long time since I last did it, and it's just long overdue. So let's get into it.
So we're just getting out the book and getting right into it. The first page we're doing is to create a fan page. Choose a favorite movie or TV show and fill in this page with notes, pictures, characters, or quotes from the film/show. I tried to print pictures of some of the characters, but my printer was malfunctioning.
Can you not?
So I ended up with a bunch of streaky messes instead. Thankfully, my local library offers printing services, but I had to wait until the next day to do it.
The next day.
Now that I have good quality, decently printed pictures, you can probably tell that these characters are from the movie The Princess Bride, one of my all-time favorite movies. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. So I'm just cutting out each of the images. I wasn't too worried about the borders because these were just going to be glued on to a white background, or that's at least what I had planned originally. But then something crazy happened. I got a creative idea.
I know. Thank you.
So this movie is based on a book, and in the movie, the story is actually being read by a grandfather to his grandson. So I thought it would be cool to kind of give the images a book theme, I guess. I took the pictures of the characters and drew a little book outline around them. I'm really surprised I went through with this idea because I'm not great at drawing, but drawing the book outline was actually pretty simple. I just needed to draw the edges of the book covers and then some random pages in them. I thought it would be easier to glue the pictures down and then draw the book around them rather than draw a book, cut it out, and hope that the picture fit on the drawing. Once I had all of the books drawn around the pictures, I cut them out and then I colored the covers of them brown. First I tried to use colored pencil, but it didn't show up the way I liked it, so I just used marker instead. I also decided to fold them to make them look like books because I just thought that gave it a cool, realistic effect. I also colored the edges of the book on the inside around the pages. I repeated this for every single one, and then once I was finished with them, I went along the page details with a fine liner Sharpie. I don't know if this made it look better or worse. In my opinion, I think it looks a little better. I also didn't have to worry too much about making the edges straight because it just made it look like a crinkly old book, which I found to be a really nice touch and fitting with the theme of the movie since it takes place in medieval times. So after I finished all of those steps, I had these cute little paper books, but I decided to add a little more detail. I went over the blank page side of each one with a dark yellow colored pencil to kind of give the paper a yellowish tint to it to make it look old and weathered. It doesn't show up too well on camera, but you can see it better in person. It is still a very minor detail though. I put the two main characters, Wesley and Buttercup, in the same book because I figured it would just make sense since they belong together, but also I just wanted to save room. And now next to the characters, I'm just writing down some quotes that they said in the movie. I got another really good idea that I'm so happy I brought to life. I got each book cover and I wrote the character's name on it in a gold paint pen. I think this was a really good idea and I'm so happy that I wound up doing it. I was a little nervous that the paint wouldn't show up great, but it actually did show up really well. It even has the metallic effect. So I just went on to every other character book and wrote their names in fancy-ish lettering on the covers with my gold paint pen. Then I went to each character, and on the blank side, I wrote in some well-known quotes or some of my favorite quotes that they said in the movie. When I was done with the quotes, I glued all of the little books into the big book, I guess, and I still had some room left, so I even made a little book for the Dread Pirate Roberts, or as most of the people in the movie referred to him, the Man in Black. Here's the result. I'm so happy with it. I do wish I gave it some type of background, but I didn't know what to do for that, but I'm still very happy with how this turned out. I almost did a very boring, basic collage. I was just going to glue the pictures into the book and then write names and quotes next to them, but I'm so happy that I got this idea instead. Looking back, it would have been kind of neat to give the little books multiple pages, but that was extra work, and I'm already really low on time for this video. But even still, this was more than good enough for me. If you want to read the quotes, go ahead and pause the video. I do have kind of sloppy cursive, so hopefully you can read it. Tell me in the comments what your favorite movie is. As I mentioned, The Princess Bride is one of my favorites, but I have lots of favorite movies. Now moving on to the next page is to create a collage. Collect paper scraps or pictures and glue them all over these 2 pages. I really didn't have a solid plan for this, so I just took out my box of my infinite supply of ancient magazines and went through them. I considered a mood board, but also just finding random pictures of a certain color scheme or just pictures I liked. But then I found this mirror and it gave me a whole new idea. I decided I was going to try to put together some kind of living room. This meant that I had to find furniture, wall decor, and the wall itself, and a floor. After I cut out the mirror, I then started looking for other things that I could use for my living room. Eventually, I found this nice little chair, so I went ahead and cut that out. There's something really cool about flipping through old magazines. You see all of these old advertisements from when you were a kid, and it's just really trippy and nostalgic, and I love it. Before I went any further with getting more furniture, I realized that I needed a floor to put it all on, so I just took this picture of a hardwood floor and used that. I also found this adorable little dog, so of course I needed to use it. Now I'm looking for a wall to go with my floor. I didn't care if it was a solid color or a painting or a pattern or whatever, I just needed some kind of wall. Something I learned in this process is that you never really realize how many food ads are in magazines until you're hungry. Anyway, I found this really cool white birch forest background and I thought that would be a cool wallpaper design for my living room. And then I finally got to glue down my little chair. After that, I just went through the magazine and looked for anything else that caught my eye that I could use. Eventually, I decided on this tiny window. I'm not sure why I went with such a small one, because there were plenty of big ones I could have used, but I'm sure I had my reasons at the time. I also cut out this little wardrobe because I thought that would be a nice touch, and this old-fashioned painting. There are some really weird visuals for ads back then, like this. This is not okay. This is just straight up nightmare fuel. And the caption doesn't even have anything to do with the picture. Doris doesn't approve of an after-soccer snack filled with high fructose corn syrup? Okay, why? Does it turn you into deer or something? Anyway, enough of that crap. I found this enormous clock and I decided that would be a nice touch to my living room, so I went ahead and put it in there. I also found this little side table with a lamp on it, but unfortunately the proportions did not match up to my living room, so I had to find a different side table. Once I was done with my living room, I moved on to the next page, and I was actually inspired by an ad that I saw in one of the magazines. I needed a night sky image, and this was perfect, minus the horrifying, threatening text on it. Sleep tight, and don't let the plaque, gingivitis, stains, sensitivity, tartar, and cavities bite! I wasn't actually that worried about the text, though, because it was mostly just going to be covered up anyway. My goal was to make my own little solar system. Always look on the back of your magazine clippings. You never know who's watching. Anyway, I was inspired to do this by an ad I saw in one of the magazines earlier. It was like a diagram painted in an old-fashioned style of our solar system. And it made me think that a magazine collage solar system would look pretty cool. Originally, my plan was to cut out various textures and just have different textured planets, but then I thought it would be neat to find anything round or spherical and use those as planets. I'll have to remember to save the baby seal for a happiness collage. I wasn't trying to replicate our solar system, so I guess technically what I'm making doesn't even have to be called a solar system. It can just be any kind of planet system. I glued everything down in a completely random order. The only thing I really had planned was that the tomato was going to be the sun. I almost didn't do this eyeball planet, but I'm so glad that I did. After I glued down the sun, I realized that I needed a moon to go with it, so I looked for a moon. I quickly decided on this fancy plate. I then glued it opposite of the sun, and my solar system was done. I realized that magazine collages aren't everybody's cup of tea. I personally don't know how I feel about them. They can come together really nicely, but they can also be very frustrating and stressful. But I think I did a decent job. They came out looking okay, in my opinion. For our last page, our task is to create an adventure. Go for a walk outside or indoors and document your adventure. This morning on Marley's morning walk, I found this 4-leaf clover, and I thought it would be a really cool addition to this page. Fun fact, I'm actually really good at finding 4-leaf clovers. I didn't even look for this one, I just happened to be looking at the ground and we were walking by a clover patch and it just stuck out right there. Anyway, I just trimmed the stem down and then found a good place to tape it. I would have done this last as it doesn't match the theme of the overall page that I ended up doing, but I didn't want the clover to wither. I wanted it to look nice and fresh when it was taped down, so that's why I did it first. After I taped the clover down, I started thinking about other things I saw on my walk. The first thing that I saw was a golden retriever. I have to use reference pictures when attempting to draw nicely, so I just used this picture off Google and did my best to replicate it. Once I had the outline done, I then added in some details on the face, and I'm just going back and finding anything that needs touching up or evening out. It looks pretty scary now, but it actually didn't end up looking that bad when I was finished with it. After the sketch was finished, I went over it with Sharpie. When I did the face with Sharpie, it ended up looking even more terrifying, but I just had to have faith in the process. When I was done with the Sharpie outline, I went back and tried to add some fur detail to the front of the dog since golden retrievers have very long fur. This part was probably the most difficult. I tried my best, and I think it ended up pretty okay. For some reason, something was telling me to use my watercolor paints, so that's what I used. It had been a while since I had last used watercolors, but it wasn't that difficult for me, thankfully, to get the hang of it again. It actually became very relaxing and therapeutic, and it was really rewarding to see it all come together. The paint job wasn't perfect, but I think that the imperfections give the watercolor a much cooler effect anyway. After I was done painting it, I went over any spots that were covered with paint with Sharpie again, and then I cut it out so I could glue it onto the page. Once it was glued down, I took my white paint pen and added some highlights. The next thing that I remembered seeing was a mourning dove, so again, I used a reference picture off Google and did my best to sketch it. Now obviously I'm not going for realism, but I use realistic pictures off Google because I still technically am creating something myself. I'm just using an actual photograph of a subject to help me make that, if that makes any sense at all. I always try to use real photographs instead of other people's drawings because I don't like to copy other people's art. Again, I like to kind of still create my own thing, or as close to that as I can. The color of the mourning dove was a little tricky. It was like a grayish brown, so I layered some yellow and then some brown and then some gray on top, and at first it looked kind of bad, but once it dried it actually looked pretty good. And just like last time, I waited until it dried and then cut it out and went over the outline with Sharpie again. I decided not to go over the spots on the wings because I thought they looked better and more natural when they were kind of softened by the paint. Then I just glued it into the book and took my paint pen and added out some highlights. The next thing I thought to draw should have been the first thing I thought to draw, which was Marley. After all, this adventure was her morning walk. I was pretty nervous about this one because I didn't have a reference photo, so I just had to try and draw it from the point of view of me walking her. Honestly, I avoid freehand drawing like the plague. I just can't do it. I need a reference photo if I want an even remotely decent outcome. I mean, look at this abomination of a snout I drew, and look how square I made her butt at first. It's not going too well. And I really didn't want to mess it up because it's Marley. Thankfully, by some miracle, the drawing ended up looking really good, especially considering it was me who drew it and I did it freehand. Next, I had to paint her, and her colors are pretty tricky. Marley's like an off-white, tannish yellow color. She's a very mixed variety of breeds, so her colors are all over the place. I didn't like how this was looking, but thankfully, like with the mourning dove, once the colors dried, they looked a lot better. The only thing I really left out of this drawing of Marley was her leash, because I thought drawing her leash would kind of ruin it. And ultimately, I'm really glad I went with that decision, because I think this drawing turned out really good. It's now raining in the background, so there will be some ambience with the further commentary. The next thing I thought to draw was lilacs. Every other house on our block seems to have a lilac bush outside of it, including mine, and I honestly adore it. Lilacs are my favorite flower. I thought this would be a nice addition to the page because it will give it a pop of color since all of the other drawings I did were more earthy toned. I wanted to do like a whole bundle of lilacs to make it really look like it was a lilac bush, but I just couldn't find a nice way to lay them out, so I stuck with making one. I also decided not to outline the branch they were growing off of just because I thought it looked better that way. Now for the next drawing, okay, let's get that out of the way, that looks inappropriate. The book didn't give instructions to just document what you saw, so I decided to document what I felt, which was a very nice, pleasant breeze. So these are just supposed to look like little gusts of wind. I glued these into the page, and then I was done. This is the final result, and I can't say enough how happy I am with it. I've been having some technical difficulties recently, so that may affect my upload schedule, but I'm trying to figure it out. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!